This afternoon, something happened that will reshape North American politics for decades to come. A single phone call between two leaders, followed by a press conference that lasted less than 10 minutes, has fundamentally altered the relationship between two nations that have been allies for over a century. What I am about to tell you involves energy markets in chaos, billions of dollars shifting hands within minutes, and a rejection so definitive that it left the most powerful government in the world scrambling for a response. This is a story about sovereignty, about leverage, and about a moment when one country decided that its independence was worth more than any deal on the table. If you think you understand how this crisis between the United States and Canada has been unfolding, I need you to reconsider everything, because what happened today changes the entire calculus of this conflict. At exactly 2:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today, the White House released an official statement announcing that President Trump had personally called Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. The purpose of the call, according to the statement, was to propose an immediate bilateral agreement that would resolve the ongoing crisis between the two nations. Now, I have been covering this dispute for weeks, and I can tell you that this phone call was unexpected. The White House had been escalating rhetoric, imposing tariffs, and making threats. A sudden offer of resolution seemed out of character. And as I began reading the details of what Trump proposed, I understood why the White House felt confident enough to make this move. They believed they had crafted an offer that Canada could not refuse. They believed they had found the formula that would end the standoff on American terms. They were wrong, and I am going to show you exactly why. According to the White House statement, Trump offered to suspend all tariffs on Canadian goods. He offered to reaffirm the United States' commitment to NORAD, the Joint Aerospace Defense Command that protects both nations. He offered to restore full intelligence sharing, which had been reduced during the height of this crisis. These are significant concessions. Tariff removal alone would save Canadian businesses billions of dollars. NORAD reaffirmation would address Canadian security concerns about whether America would honor its defense commitments. Intelligence sharing restoration would repair a critical element of the security relationship. On the surface, this looked like Trump was giving Canada everything it had been demanding. The White House described this as a generous offer that would restore the partnership that has served both nations for generations. They said the president was confident that Prime Minister Carney would recognize this as an opportunity to end the dispute and move forward. That confidence lasted exactly 96 minutes. At 4:23 p.m., less than 2 hours after the White House released its statement, Mark Carney walked to a podium in Ottawa. The International Press Corps had gathered, expecting some kind of positive development, perhaps the announcement of negotiations or a framework for resolving the dispute. What they got instead was 4 words that will echo through history. Carney looked directly into the camera and said, "The answer is no. Not a conditional rejection. Not an offer to negotiate different terms. Not diplomatic language leaving doors open for future discussions. Just a flat, definitive, unmistakable refusal." And then Carney explained exactly why he was rejecting what the White House considered a generous offer. His explanation has sent immediate shockwaves through energy markets, through capitals around the world, and through the White House itself. Canada said no to the United States of America. And in doing so, Canada has shifted the balance of power in North American relations in ways that cannot be undone. I need to walk you through what actually happened, what was really being offered, and why this rejection matters far more than any single trade dispute. Let me take you inside that phone call, because the details reveal something crucial about how Washington fundamentally misunderstood Canada's position in this crisis. According to sources familiar with the conversation, which took place at 1:15 p.m. this afternoon, Trump opened by telling Carney that the dispute between their two countries had gone too far. He said it was time to make a deal, and that he was prepared to give Canada everything it had been asking for: tariff removal, NORAD continuation, intelligence sharing restoration, even a public statement respecting Canadian sovereignty. For anyone who has been following this conflict, those sound like major concessions from an administration that has been hostile to Canadian interests for months. But Trump was not offering these things for free. He wanted something in return, and what he wanted reveals the true nature of American intentions in this crisis. Trump wanted what he called energy security guarantees. Specifically, he wanted Canada to sign a binding 10-year agreement that would lock in energy exports to the United States at current levels. The agreement would require Canada to export a minimum of 3.8 million barrels of crude oil per day to the United States. It would require 2.7 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day. It would require 1,400 megawatts of electricity per hour. These numbers match current export levels. So on the surface, Trump was not asking Canada to increase anything. He was simply asking Canada to guarantee that current exports would continue for a decade. But here is where the proposal became something very different from a simple trade agreement. Trump also wanted price caps. Canadian energy exports to the United States would be priced at market rates, but could never exceed a 15% premium over prices charged to other customers. And if Canada failed to meet these requirements, if exports fell below the guaranteed minimums, or if prices exceeded the caps, Canada would face financial penalties of $500 million per month. Think about what this actually means. Trump was asking Canada to surrender control over its own natural resources for the next 10 years. Trump reportedly told Carney that this was a win-win arrangement. Canada gets tariff relief and security guarantees. The United States gets energy security. Both sides move forward together. He framed it as a personal favor, telling Carney that he should accept immediately before political opposition in America made it impossible to offer such generous terms. According to sources who were briefed on the call, Carney listened to the entire proposal without interrupting. This is significant because it suggests that Carney was not reacting emotionally or dismissively. He was absorbing every detail, understanding exactly what was being asked. When Trump finished outlining his proposal, Carney responded with measured professionalism. He said that he needed to consult with his cabinet and with Parliament before responding to any formal proposal. He told the president that he would have an answer within 3 hours. The call ended, and what happened next would determine the future of this relationship. Carney immediately convened an emergency cabinet meeting in Ottawa. According to sources who were present in that room, the meeting lasted approximately 45 minutes. Carney presented the details of Trump's offer exactly as they had been conveyed to him. He did not editorialize or characterize the proposal in negative terms. He simply laid out the facts and asked his ministers for their input. Several cabinet members argued that accepting the deal would be the pragmatic choice. It would end the crisis immediately, restore trade between the two nations, and allow Canada to focus on other priorities. These ministers pointed out that Canada was already exporting these quantities of energy to the United States anyway. So formalizing those exports in an agreement would not change anything practically. But Carney saw it differently. And what he said in that cabinet meeting explains everything about his subsequent public rejection. He told his ministers that this offer was a trap. He said that signing away Canada's resource sovereignty would leave Canada with no leverage for the next decade. He warned that once such an agreement was in place, Trump or any future American president could impose any policy they wanted on Canada. And Canada would be unable to respond by adjusting energy exports because they would be contractually locked in. Carney said he did not enter politics to make Canada subordinate to anyone, and he walked out of that meeting prepared to deliver a rejection that would reshape continental politics. At precisely 4:23 p.m. Eastern Time, Mark Carney stepped up to the podium in Ottawa. The room was packed with journalists from around the world, and there was genuine uncertainty about what he would say. Some analysts had predicted that Canada would negotiate, perhaps counter with modified terms. Others thought Carney might accept the deal while framing it as a victory for Canadian interests. Nobody expected what came next. Carney opened by confirming the basic facts. He acknowledged that President Trump had called him this afternoon to propose an agreement that would resolve the current dispute between their countries. He confirmed that the president offered to remove tariffs, reaffirm NORAD, and restore intelligence sharing. He confirmed that in exchange, Trump asked Canada to sign a 10-year agreement guaranteeing energy exports to the United States at specified levels and capped prices. Then, Carney said the words that will define this crisis and possibly his entire career. He said he had considered the president's proposal carefully. And the answer is no. The press room went completely silent. Journalists who had been typing on their laptops stopped mid-sentence. Camera operators who had been adjusting their equipment froze. Everyone understood that something significant had just happened. Carney continued speaking, and what he said next was clearly designed to be heard not just by Americans, but by every nation watching this crisis unfold. He said he wanted to explain why Canada was declining this offer, because the reasons go to the heart of what kind of country Canada is and what kind of relationships Canada will accept. His first point was fundamental. Canada's natural resources belong to Canadians. He emphasized that Canadians decide how those resources are used, who they are sold to, and at what price. Those decisions are made based on Canadian interests, not based on agreements that lock Canada into serving another country's interests. This was a direct rejection of the premise underlying Trump's offer. The American proposal assumed that Canadian energy existed primarily to serve American needs. Carney was saying that this assumption was wrong and that Canada would not accept any agreement built on that foundation. His second point was about leverage and future flexibility. He explained that the proposed agreement would eliminate Canada's ability to respond to future American actions. If the United States imposed tariffs again, or threatened Canadian sovereignty again, or violated agreements again, Canada would be unable to adjust energy policy in response because it would be contractually prohibited from doing so. Carney called this dependence rather than partnership, and he made clear that Canada would not accept dependence under any circumstances. His third point addressed the fundamental structure of the proposed relationship. Carney said that Trump's offer treated Canada as a resource supplier to the United States, rather than as a sovereign partner with its own interests and relationships. He pointed out that Canada exports energy to many countries, not just the United States. Those export decisions are made by Canadian companies and the Canadian government, based on market conditions and strategic priorities. He declared that Canada would not subordinate those decisions to American demands, regardless of what concessions were offered in return. This framing was crucial because it positioned the rejection not as a negotiating tactic, but as a statement of principle. Carney was not saying no in order to extract better terms. He was saying no because the entire premise of the offer was unacceptable. Then, Carney said something that immediately moved financial markets around the world. He announced that Canada is open to selling energy to the United States and open to long-term commercial relationships. But those relationships will be negotiated on equal terms between sovereign nations, not dictated by one side. He laid out a clear path forward. If the United States wants reliable access to Canadian energy, it needs to treat Canada as a partner, respect Canadian sovereignty, honor agreements, and recognize that Canada has alternatives. And then came the statement that functioned as a warning shot across the bow of American energy policy. Carney announced that as of today, Canada has received purchase proposals for its oil and natural gas from 11 countries on 4 continents. He said Canada is evaluating all of them, and that the United States is welcome to compete for Canadian energy on the same terms as everyone else. That last phrase carried enormous weight. The United States is welcome to compete. For generations, America has assumed privileged access to Canadian resources. Carney was announcing that those days are finished. The United States will now have to compete with China, Japan, South Korea, India, Germany, and other nations for Canadian energy. There will be no special relationship, no guaranteed access, no assumption that Canadian resources flow south by default. Carney closed by speaking directly to the American people. He said, "Canada values our relationship and wants partnership, trade, and cooperation. But partnership requires mutual respect. Today's offer did not reflect that respect. Canada declined it. Canada remains open to discussions based on equality and sovereignty. But Canada will not trade its independence for temporary relief from policies that should never have been imposed in the first place." The press conference lasted less than 10 minutes. Its effects will last for decades. Within 15 minutes of Carney finishing his statement, United States energy markets began moving in ways that signaled genuine panic among traders and analysts. I have covered market reactions to political events for years, and I can tell you that what happened this afternoon was not normal volatility. This was markets repricing fundamental assumptions about North American energy supply. West Texas Intermediate crude oil futures jumped $8.40 per barrel, a 7.2% increase in a matter of minutes. Traders were immediately pricing in the risk that Canadian oil supply to the United States could be reduced or redirected to other buyers. This is not speculation or political commentary. This is money moving based on hard calculations about supply security. Natural gas futures for delivery to the Midwest spiked by 14.3% as traders processed the implications of Carney's statement about 11 countries submitting purchase proposals. If Canada signs supply agreements with Asian buyers, the natural gas that currently heats homes and powers factories across the American Midwest will be shipped across the Pacific instead. And the markets are now treating that possibility as realistic rather than theoretical. The equity markets reflected this same reality. Shares of American refineries that depend on Canadian crude oil collapsed in afternoon trading. Valero Energy dropped 11%. Phillips 66 fell 9%. Marathon Petroleum declined 13%. These are not small movements for major energy companies. These drops represent billions of dollars in market capitalization, evaporating because investors now believe that reliable access to Canadian oil can no longer be assumed. I want to emphasize what this means for ordinary Americans. These market movements will translate into higher gasoline prices, higher heating costs, and higher prices for every product that requires energy to manufacture or transport. The economic consequences of today's rejection will be felt in every household that fills up a car or pays a utility bill. The markets are not reacting to political theater. They are reacting to a fundamental shift in the strategic landscape of North American energy. Some analysts are questioning whether Canada can actually follow through on threats to redirect energy exports. The existing pipeline and transmission infrastructure is designed to move oil, gas, and electricity south to American markets. Can Canada realistically change the direction of those flows? According to energy experts I have consulted, the answer is yes, but it requires time and investment. Canada's request for partnership funding includes substantial allocations for building new export terminals on Canada's Pacific and Atlantic coasts, constructing pipelines to those terminals, and developing the shipping capacity to move energy to overseas buyers. If this funding is approved and these projects are fast-tracked, Canada could have the infrastructure to export significant quantities of energy to markets other than the United States, within 18 to 24 months. Once that infrastructure exists, American leverage over Canadian energy decisions disappears permanently. This is not theoretical. This is engineering and economics. Pipelines can be built, terminals can be constructed, ships can be chartered. Canada has the resources and the expertise to diversify its export infrastructure, and today's events provide powerful motivation to do exactly that. Meanwhile, the White House appears to have been completely unprepared for this outcome. According to sources familiar with internal discussions, the White House genuinely believed that Carney would accept Trump's offer. They thought they had crafted a deal that addressed Canadian concerns while securing American interests. When Carney rejected it, and particularly when he rejected it so publicly and so definitively, the White House had no prepared response. More than an hour passed before any official reaction emerged. And when Trump did respond, his statement contradicted basic factual realities about American energy dependence. He posted that America does not need Canadian energy and has plenty of its own. But 60% of U.S. oil imports come from Canada because American refineries are specifically configured to process Canadian heavy crude, not the light crude produced domestically. Converting those refineries would cost billions of dollars and take years to complete. The gap between White House rhetoric and energy reality has never been wider than it is today. I have been analyzing the potential trajectories of this crisis, and I need to share with you 3 scenarios that represent the most likely paths forward from this point. Each of these scenarios has significant implications for both countries, and understanding them will help you interpret the developments that unfold over the coming weeks and months. The first scenario involves competitive bidding for Canadian energy resources. Over the next 60 days, multiple countries can submit formal offers to purchase Canadian oil and natural gas on long-term contracts. Canada would then run a competitive bidding process, evaluating offers based on price, terms, and strategic considerations. The United States would be invited to participate in this process, but would receive no preferential treatment. If the United States refuses to match the prices or terms offered by Asian buyers, Canada will sign major supply agreements with countries like China, Japan, and South Korea. Those agreements could commit 30% or more of current U.S.-bound exports to Asian markets instead. American energy prices would increase significantly. Midwest refineries would face serious supply constraints, and the administration would be forced to either match competitive international terms or accept dramatically reduced Canadian supply. The second scenario involves an infrastructure race between the two countries. Canada could use approved funding to accelerate construction of Pacific and Atlantic export terminals, creating physical infrastructure that enables energy exports to non-American markets. The United States might attempt to block or delay these projects through diplomatic pressure on countries supplying equipment or financing. Canada could respond to such interference by further restricting U.S.-bound energy and prioritizing existing infrastructure for non-American buyers. Within 2 years under this scenario, Canada would have diversified export infrastructure that permanently reduces American leverage. American dependence on Canadian energy would be dramatically lower, but American energy costs would be permanently higher because alternative supplies from other sources are more expensive and less reliable. The economic damage to American consumers and industries would be substantial and long-lasting. The third scenario represents crisis escalation, and it is the most dangerous possibility. American energy shortages caused by Canadian export reductions could trigger a domestic political crisis in the United States. Gasoline prices in key Midwest states could spike by 40% or more, creating intense pressure on elected officials. In response to this pressure, extreme measures could be considered. An energy emergency could be declared, and there could be threats to seize Canadian energy assets located in the United States, or to block Canadian exports and transit through American territory. If such escalation occurred, Canada could respond by cutting off all energy exports to the United States immediately and completely. The consequences would be catastrophic. American refineries would shut down. Rolling blackouts would hit the Northeast. The economic damage would be measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. Under this scenario, Congress would ultimately be forced to intervene, compelling acceptance of Canadian terms simply to restore supply. The American position would collapse entirely, and the long-term damage to the bilateral relationship would take generations to repair. I am watching several indicators that will help determine which scenario unfolds. First, whether any country publicly announces an energy supply agreement with Canada within the next 2 weeks. Such an announcement would signal that competitive bidding is already underway and that Canada's alternatives are real rather than rhetorical. Second, whether American energy prices continue rising in domestic markets. Sustained price increases will create political pressure that limits American negotiating options. Third, whether Trump makes any statement that walks back his energy demands or suggests flexibility on terms. Any softening of the American position would indicate recognition that the current approach has failed. Today, Canada said no to the United States of America. That simple fact represents the headline that will dominate coverage of this crisis. But the deeper meaning is more significant. Canada said no because accepting would have meant accepting subordinate status. Prime Minister Carney chose sovereignty over short-term relief, independence over convenience, and principle over pragmatism. That choice means the old relationship, where America assumed and Canada complied, is finished. Whatever comes next will be built on different foundations, and both countries will have to navigate a future that neither fully anticipated when this crisis began.